The episode opens with teacher Elizabeth Thatcher teaching her students about the law of inertia and gravity. She explains that although the Earth pulls obstaculos on heavier objects like a shoe, the heavier object is more reluctant to get moving. Therefore, when a shoe and a comb are dropped simultaneously, they will hit the ground at the same time, a tie. She encourages the students to experiment with different objects themselves, but carefully warns them not to break anything. Meanwhile, Elizabeth chats with Abigail about the hardships of life on the frontier, especially doing laundry. Elizabeth confesses she misses home, remembering conveniences like a closet always full of clean, fresh clothes. Abigail warns that winter is much harsher, when temperatures drop below zero. Suddenly, Mr. Spurlock, a representative of the Pacific Northwest Mining Company, arrives to give Abigail a notice. The notice, signed by Henry Gowen, the company's executive director, requires the widows to vacate their company-owned houses within 14 days to make room for new miners. Other widows receive similar notices. This decision is completely legal, though incredibly cruel. One woman shares that her 2 children were born and raised in this town, and it's the only home they know. She doesn't want to break their hearts, but the company leaves her no choice. She has written to her mother in Lethbridge, asking for permission to move in with her. Elizabeth suggests the widows pool their money to hire a lawyer to fight back, but they explain they don't have enough money. Abigail, with an unyielding spirit, declares that if the company is recruiting new miners to replace their husbands, then it's time for the widows to step into the background and for the new miners to appear. This implies a bold plan. At the mine office, Mr. Gowen is discussing with the new foreman, Mr. Ansville, about clearing the collapsed mine shafts. Mr. Ansville states he doesn't have enough manpower to complete the job faster. Gowen reassures him that he has recruited more men and help will arrive soon. Just then, the widows, led by Abigail, appear before the mine office, dressed as miners. They offer to work in the mine in exchange for keeping their homes. Gowen is initially skeptical, worried about their safety and that of their children. But Abigail and the other women insist they understand the risks and are ready to accept the challenge. Coal Valley is their home, and they are only asking for a chance. They propose to clear one of the blocked mine shafts within 2 weeks, before the eviction deadline. If successful, they will be allowed to stay. If not, they will leave quietly and even clean their houses thoroughly before departing. Gowen agrees on the condition that none of his men are allowed to help them, to ensure the safety of his employees. The widows agree and sign a waiver. Gowen believes they won't last more than a week, but at least they will clear part of the mine for him. In another development, Elizabeth's supply crates have arrived. The saloon owner complains about the crates blocking the front of his building. Constable Jack Thornton helps her carry them inside. Elizabeth is delighted to have her book collection replaced. It will be a treasure for her students. Jack also notices a journal. Elizabeth says she already has so much to write about. Jack reminds her not to forget to write about how her father had him posted there to babysit his daughter instead of chasing pirates and whiskey runners in Cape Fullerton. Their conversation is interrupted by the arrival of students. Jack is still bitter about being posted there and says that as long as Elizabeth is tied to her father's apron strings, he will be too. Elizabeth excitedly introduces the new books to her students, saying that thanks to this generous gift, they can explore the whole world through reading. However, not all students seem enthusiastic. Rachel, a student, sadly says she doesn't want to leave Coal Valley. To stir the students' love for their hometown, Elizabeth asks them to write a short essay on the topic, Coal Valley, is my home because. Meanwhile, the widows prepare to descend into mine shaft number 14. Abigail encourages them, saying this is a fight to keep their homes. They are warned about the dangers in the mine. If the canary stops singing for 15 minutes, they must quickly evacuate, as too much methane or CO2 could cause an explosion, especially with the oil lamps on their heads. Back in the classroom, Cassandra reads her essay, recounting her first memory of Coal Valley when her father jumped off the wagon, fell to the ground, and kissed the earth, thanking God for giving them a second chance. Gabe shares that Coal Valley is home because it's where he had his first kiss, and he will marry that girl someday. Rachel, without needing a notebook, tells her story from the heart. Her father, before he passed away, gave her a piece of coal and told her to think of it as a diamond, his pearl of great price. He said it was a treasure, just like this town is a treasure for all who live here. And every treasure has a price to be dug for. Rachel worries about the mothers working in the mine, afraid that something terrible will happen to them as it happened to their fathers. Elizabeth encourages the children, saying that fear and hardship will make them stronger, and they must not lose hope. Constable Jack Thornton confronts Mr. Gowan about allowing women into the mine. Gowan insists it wasn't his idea and that the women entered the mine with their eyes wide open. Jack points out that Gowan forbade his men from helping. Gowan explains that his men are the only thing standing between him and a complete shutdown of the mine, and he will not endanger their lives for a group of stubborn women. Jack reminds Gowan that these women are trying to save their homes. Gowan warns Jack, as an officer of the law, not to take sides in a property dispute, and that if evictions become necessary, Jack will have to enforce them. Gowan boasts that he has been generous by allowing the widows to stay in company housing rent-free since the mine disaster, whereas, according to the contract, he could have evicted them much sooner. Jack sarcastically implies that Gowan surely did everything he could to take care of them, just as he took every precaution to protect their husbands and spared no expense for worker safety. Gowan says nothing. Jack goes to the post office to ask if there is any mail for him, but there isn't. However, he receives another heavy package, possibly a book. At the mine, a man advises the widows to give up because the work is too dangerous. But another man says they are only doing what anyone would do in their shoes. After a hard day's work, a mother returns with bruised hands. Other wives, whose husbands forbade them from entering the mine because it was too dangerous, have brought food for the widows. They feel that bringing food is such a small gesture, but it's all they can do. Abigail thanks them and says they did the right thing by not risking their safety for their children's sake. Elizabeth cooks dinner for Abigail, but Abigail is too exhausted and just wants to sleep. Elizabeth wishes she could do something to help. Abigail reassures her that Elizabeth is doing her part by taking care of the children, who need their teacher now more than ever. Elizabeth later encounters Jack, who is keeping an eye on things. She questions why he isn't doing more than just sitting there looking smug. Jack reiterates that regulations prevent him from taking sides until he has to enforce Gowan's eviction orders, if necessary, and that is because the law requires him to. Elizabeth asserts that evictions will not be necessary. Jack believes these women have taken on an impossible challenge. Elizabeth asks if it's because they are women. Jack brings up Elizabeth needing a man's help to lift her crates into the saloon. Elizabeth feels belittled. Jack suggests that now is the time for Elizabeth to use her big city brains to find another way out of this mess. That night, Elizabeth writes in her journal, agonizing over the family's hardships and the mother's bravery. She also doesn't forget to mention the Mountie sitting on his horse doing nothing and his words about big city brains. An idea suddenly flashes in her mind. The next morning, Elizabeth goes to the saloon, but not to drink. Inside the mine, a strange noise startles the widows. Abigail reassures them that her husband used to call it the ghost in the attic. A little later, one of the women notices the canary is silent and screams a warning about gas. Everyone rushes to get out. Fortunately, everyone is safe, only Florence has a cut that needs stitching. The woman who sounded the alarm is scolded because the bird is still alive and chirping normally. Elizabeth falls asleep at her desk at school. Rachel wakes her up. Elizabeth, flustered, apologizes to the students for oversleeping. She decides to change the lesson plan. Instead of math, she asks each student to grab a research manual or encyclopedia. They will search for the words home, house, or property to try to find a way to help the mothers in the mine. Some students seem uninterested, but others are happy to skip math. After many hours of searching, Elizabeth finally finds a useful piece of information in an old book, the Domain Act, which mentions home improvements like painting. Elizabeth goes to Mr. Yost's store to buy all the paint and brushes in stock. She pays and requests delivery to the widow's row houses by 8 a.m. the next day. Meanwhile, the injured widows are being cared for. 7 of them are too injured to return to work. The men in town begin to express admiration for the courage of the remaining women. Elizabeth meets with the widows and announces her plan, to paint their houses, based on the Domain Act that she and the children found. However, when Mr. Yost brings the paint, there are only a few cans. Mr. Goen appears and explains that most of the paint had already been purchased by him for the company for maintenance of the mine buildings. He returns Elizabeth's money and says that the Domain Act is nothing new to the company and they have dealt with it before. He praises Elizabeth's ingenuity but insists the agreement remains, the mine shaft must be cleared for them to stay. The widows return to the mine and discover that a large part of their work has been destroyed because the roof timber pins didn't hold. Florence is desperate, believing this is sabotage by Goen and the company. She feels she can't go on and says there's no such thing as lady miners. She decides to spend her remaining time saying goodbye to her daughter and leaves. The other women also lose heart. Elizabeth returns to school, her heart heavy. Rachel comes and says her mother told them they have to leave Coal Valley. The little girl gives Elizabeth the piece of coal her father had given her, hoping it will help her teacher love this place as much as she does. Elizabeth is moved and decides to dismiss school indefinitely. She decides to go into the mine herself to help. Jack tries to stop her, saying it's too dangerous, but Elizabeth is adamant. Some other mothers also object to the teacher abandoning her teaching duties to dig coal. Abigail speaks up for Elizabeth, saying that if she is willing to put her community before her own safety, that is commendable. Jack, though worried, understands Elizabeth's reasons and tells her to be careful. When Elizabeth arrives at the mine entrance, she is surprised to see Florence has returned. Florence says that if this little Miss Princess can give it her best, so can the rest of them. And then, all the women in town appear, ready to work together in around-the-clock shifts. Elizabeth reflects on her father's words when she set off for the West, that he hoped she would find what God had shaped her for and then give her whole heart to it. She realizes that being a teacher is much more than what's in books. Sometimes one has to delve into the dark trenches of life, willing to lose everything to gain what God has shaped them for. Because the things that matter most in life have a cost, and it is in that sacrifice that we find our true treasure. Finally, Elizabeth thanks Jack for leaving her the note in the saloon. Jack says it was the least he could do. They tease each other about Elizabeth snoring, which she denies, and her private journal, which may or may not contain unflattering things about Jack. Jack still regrets not getting his posting in Cape Fullerton chasing pirates and whiskey runners, but perhaps life in Coal Valley isn't so bad after all.